Okay, and now on to our operating expenses budget. Our operating expenses budget is going to help us figure out our variable expenses, our fixed expenses, and it's going to lead us to our total operating income. So, as you can see, we still have 17 units across the board, which is 102 muffins. And we're going to start off with our variable expenses. So, we decided as a group that we were going to put a cellophane wrap around it and a ribbon as well. So that's going to be a variable expense. And the way we had it calculated, it's going to come out to 6 cents per muffin for the ribbon expense and 8 cents a muffin for the cellophane expense. So let's go on to March, and March is a little different from the rest of the months because we had a couple more units that we bought, so therefore we had to wrap more. So we got the 0.06 times the amount, which leads us to 6.84, and then we do the same with the 0.08. And that leads us to 9.12. And then our total variable operating expense for the month of March is 15.96. So on to April, we had a different amount of units. So we got 6.12 and 8.16, which leads to a total variable operating expense. Okay, so now we're going to go over our budgeted income statement. A budgeted income statement is pretty similar to a normal income statement, except for it has each period laid out in budget form. So first we have our sales, which I got from the sales budget. So we have $127.50 per month, and so then after that you subtract the cost of goods sold, which comes from the direct materials budget. So let's start off in March. Here we have $63.58 as a cost of goods sold because we had to buy an extra 2 units. And so then you subtract the cost of goods sold, and then you get your gross profit. So we had a gross profit in March of $63.92. So after you have your gross profit, we have to take a look into our operating expenses, which we get from the operating expenses budget that I just went over. So once we have our gross profit of $63.92, and we're going to subtract our operating expenses, which was $82.26. So our operating income then is a negative $18.34. So, and since we had no other expenses such as sales tax or anything, it's the same as our net income. So our net income for the month of March was a loss of $18.34. So let's move on to April. We have our normal 120 muffins, so we sell $127.50 worth of stuff. And then our cost of goods sold for this month is going to be $58.14 from the direct materials budget. And then you subtract our gross profit, or that gives us our gross profit of $69.36. So once again, we subtract our operating expenses to get our operating income, which is a loss of $11.22, and then that's the same as our net income, which is also a loss of $11.22 for April. May, we had the exact same amount of units, so it's the exact same amount of loss. That's a 14.28. And that's also going to be the same for May because we had 102 muffins or 17 units in April and May. So now on to our fixed operating expenses. Our only fixed operating expense was salary expense because we were working the same amount of hours every week for all 3 months. So our salary expense, which I got from the direct labor budget, is 66.3, and that's going to go to total fixed operating expense and then across the board for April and May. And then our total operating expenses are all these combined. So when you take all of them from March, starting with the 6.84 from the ribbon expense, and the total variable expense plus the total fixed expense is going to lead us to a total operating expense of 82.26 for March, and then 80.58 and 80.58 for May. Alright, now we're going to go over our quarter figures. So we have a total of 51 units. And then if you look at our variable expenses for ribbon and cellophane, a total of $44.52. And then if we're going to take a look at our fixed operating expenses, we have a total of $198.90, which is only from salary expense from the direct labor budget. And so when you add our fixed and variable operating expenses, you get a total of $243.42. All right, why don't we move on to our quarter figures now? So we had a total sales in 3 months of $382.50, and our cost of goods sold ended up being $179.86. So when you subtract the cost of goods sold, our total gross profit is $202.64. So then when you take into account the operating expenses, which were $243.42, you subtract that from the $202.64, we get an operating income of a negative $40.78, and then we have a loss of $40.78.
So here is our finished product. It's with the cellophane wrapping and the ribbon and then the muffin, of course, inside. This is just one of them, but this is just to give you an example of what it looked like, what we were selling. And after doing this project, we learned a lot more about budgeting, but we weren't necessarily successful in the way that we chose our price for the muffins and how we sold it.
So to recap, if we were to do this again, we would decrease our wage rate and most likely increase the sales price. Thank you for watching our video, and we hope you learned a lot about budgeting today.